go ahead and pull up a slide for that. And I am going to make this a very quick introduction. Jill Boullion is the executive director of the BioLand Conservancy in Houston. Mark Friesenhahn is coming to us from Comal County, just outside of New Braunfels. Fermin Ortiz is coming to us from Llano County, near Sandy Creek, and Bob Webster is coming to us from Bernie. Jill, Mark, and Fermin are all involved in a coalition that the Hill Country Alliance has helped form this year, called Texans for Responsible Aggregate Mining. And aggregate mining is the subject of this next panel. I won't take any more time with introductions, and we'll just dive right in. If I stop sharing the screen, let's see how this goes. I think you all can still see me, and some of the panelists are still coming on. Good morning to you all.
Morning.
Good morning, Fermin and Bob, and
good morning,
Jill and Mark. You can share your video as well.
There you go.
Fantastic, fantastic, great. So, like I said, I have the pleasure of introducing this, of moderating this panel. It's been a real pleasure to get to know Fermin and Mark and Jill through interaction with this coalition, Texans for Responsible Aggregate Mining. And Bob is joining us in his capacity as the president of the Civil Oak Conservancy, as well as a director of the Cow Creek Groundwater Conservation District. I will, if I've left anything out of your very brief introductions, folks, and I encourage everybody to go to our program online to read their full introductions, but I didn't want to take any more time before we get into the subject matter here, which is the expansion of aggregates in the Hill Country and across the state, and the impacts that has on communities, and of course what communities are doing to try and address those impacts. Let me get to, so you know, I think what we'll do with this panel is I'll go ahead and ask each of you one very brief introductory question, and then we'll open it up for more of a conversational style discussion. And thank you all again for making time for this panel to share your insights with our audience. Mark, we'll start with you. Mark, you are a retired engineer, more than 40 years working in oil and gas industry. You bring a lot of expertise to this coalition, and you work with another group of engineers who are bringing even more expertise. Can you tell us briefly about the scale of aggregates activity in the Hill Country and some of the biggest impacts this activity is having on our communities and natural resources?
Yeah, I sure can, Cliff. I had the fortunate opportunity to work 42 years in oil and gas. The last 9 was engineering support for our oil sands mining operations in Canada. So fortuitously or unfortuitously, I spent a lot of time working on surface mining, which is directly relevant to the APOs. Would it be okay to put up those 3 slides, Cliff? I want to just answer by talking through those in a minute or two. And by the way, I grew up after being an oil and gas employee and became a pecan farmer. So that's what I do now. Okay, APOs, aggregate production operations. And I put up here what you need to know. And what we're talking about is aggregates, open pit surface mining, and all the associated industry activities, including gravel, sand mining on the rivers, concrete batch plants that use the aggregate to make concrete for our homes and highways, hot mix asphalt plants, ditto for highways and driveways, and other smaller operations like bulk material handling facilities. We call those APOs. What I'm going to do is just give you a few minutes, or I'm going to answer Cliff's question. APOs, we're dealing with a massive industry in Texas. And if I just focus on this picture for a minute, what you need to know is right there. This is a approximately 8, maybe 8.5-year-old operation on the Balcones Fault Zone, about 2 miles to the north of I-35 at the exit 180 between San Antonio and New Braunfels. What you look at here, and what I want you to carry away, is the only things regulated in this massive industry are the facilities in the upper right of the picture. That's the crusher and the facilities, and anything related to stormwater runoff or the potential to contaminate the aquifers below it. The complete mining operation is largely ignored. And what I'm saying here is they don't have to account for where their water's coming from, how they're going to use the road infrastructure. There's minimal review of the air contaminants and dust coming off these facilities. And most importantly, I want you to carry a picture away that what you see here is becoming a moonscape that will be left when the industry is finished. There are no requirements to put this back in a sustainable way to preserve our hill country. Let me talk about what these folks are. Next slide, Cliff. Okay, and what I'm going to do here is just briefly make a few points, and I'm going to ask the audience and the other panel members to just glance at the data on this chart. APOs, aggregate production operations. They're a big industry in Texas, much bigger than the next state. You can see the chart in the upper right. They include all the things I mentioned, surface mines on down through crushing, processing, and so on there in the upper left bullet points. The industry is growing rapidly to meet demand in Texas. This is a common phenomenon all over the U.S. Growth promotes the need for the products these folks made. We need it. We need gravel for our driveways. We need materials for highways and our houses and our shopping malls and business industrial centers, etc. However, Texas does not have comprehensive regulations covering this industry. There's a historical backdrop here that goes back to 1977, where the federal government deemed it crucial to regulate surface mining with something called the Surface Mining and Reclamation Act of 1977. And if you look at the picture in the lower left, almost all of the states in the U.S. have adopted these regulations and comprehensive rules governing mining, except Texas and a few other states shown in red. In fact, the numbers would say over 80% of the nation is covered for comprehensive regulations covering APOs. 18% is not. Texas is the bulk of the component that is not regulated. These APOs are big. They're international, they're nationwide, and they're local. If you look at the chart in the lower left, they operate all over the nation. In the case of Lafarge Holcim, I'll just pick the top row there. They work in 41 states, only 6 of which do not have comprehensive regs. Going down the list, you can see where most of the major players who we bump into in our daily interactions in Texas operate all over the nation. And what I want to end up with on this is we need to know that we have a massive industry that's largely unregulated. The influence of the industry on our state leadership and local leadership is strong and ongoing and well established. We have a massive issue on our hands to get to some middle ground dealing with this massive industry. How do we do that? Next slide, Cliff. We feel, oh, that's interesting. We got every other one blacked out. Okay, that's fine. We'll just cover the key consideration here. What I've just told you points to the issues and conflicts related to the APO industry is large and complex. How do we achieve resolution that would be meaningful to all the stakeholders? And I want to underscore this, since I worked for one of the largest companies in the nation for 42 years. I am not against industry. I am for industry. However, this massive industry is moving ahead so aggressively to meet our rapid growth in the state that they're stomping on all the other stakeholders involved, primarily the landowners and folks around them who are dealing with the near-term effects of particulate emissions, water shortages, and then the longer-term implications of leaving the moonscapes behind unreclaimed. We have a firm view that if we solve these 7 key issues shown here, and I'll just read them: air particulates, water use and availability, that's number 2 hidden there, surface and groundwater. Let me flip over on the one I can read. on my other screen. Number three, excuse me, is surface and groundwater contamination. And you can read all the things that are involved there. Number 4, the rapid development that is largely unregulated. How do we deal with that? We apply the SMACRA philosophy and regulatory climate that's used everywhere else. Truck traffic, those of you around these large concentrations of APOs know about the issues there. Nuisance issues, the industry inadvertently or directly is stealing our nighttime skies and our quiet peace of the hill country. We're diminishing that cultural heritage that we just heard in the prior talk, and it's going to go away unless some kind of middle ground is achieved. Then finally, economic impacts, our property values and misapplication of tax valuations by these properties. Cliff, it's a big problem. It's a complex one. It's going to take a long time to fix. But unless we can put in our mind that we have a massive industry, we have the facts and understanding of how they operate, and if we can convince all the stakeholders, primarily the legislature, I think we can get to some resolution to those issues. And that's how I would answer your question.
Thanks so much, Mark. We're going to go to you next, Fermin. Fermin, you got involved with this issue when a sand plant threatened to move into Sandy Creek. And since then, you started a group with your neighbors called Save Sandy Creek, and then Save Sandy Creek joined Texans for Responsible Aggregate Mining, and you became the spokesperson for the coalition. Can you tell us briefly about Texas for Responsible Aggregate Mining? What are the coalition's goals? Who's currently in the coalition? Who can join, and how it works?
Certainly. Thank you for the time, and thank you for everybody that's taken the time to understand and know a little bit more about this issue. tramtexas.org, that would be tramtexas, spelled out, .org is our website. Please go there. Try and find more information and get involved, because this situation is not going to go away. As Mark very well stated, this is something that's going to just continue to percolate and get worse until it blows up. We have to get ahead of it. We do have some legislators that want to be involved, are involved. Andy Murr, Terry Wilson, Aaron Sweener, very active and involved. We have some legislators that need a little nudge. I would just ask everyone that's watching to call your legislator and find out where they're at on this issue, and encourage them to be on the Texas side, because whatever we do or don't do is what we're going to leave our children and grandchildren and many other generations. We're a family of ranchers out here since 1860, and I would like to leave future generations a lot better Texas than where we're headed. It is important that we do coalesce together, work together. There are over 30 counties represented by TRAM, and we have some fantastic people involved, some experts and such. We are talking with the legislatures and working with them. This is a nonpartisan issue, guys. We can't let this happen and then in 5 or 10 years blame the other party and say, hey, y'all didn't do anything. Both parties need to come together to solve this issue. Some people were wanting legislation, people wanting it fixed overnight. I hate to be such a realist, but that's not going to work. Some people were asking for a moratorium. That's not going to work, because no one wants to get behind that. TxDOT can't keep up with enough product to get the highways safe and solid as we keep growing and developing. Our construction industry needs the product daily, falling behind. So that won't work. Let's take a smaller bite. Let's take a more realistic bite. Representative Terry Wilson brought up something that I think is really something we should all get behind, and that is making companies that do PBMs, best practice management provision, where they are responsible parties. Believe it or not, there are some in Texas that are doing it the right way, APOs that are doing it the right way, because they come in from other states, they're already accustomed to it, they've already put it part of their budget, they come in and doing it the right way. A lot of others, however, are not. We need a level playing field where the good guys, if you will, that are trying to do it right and provide the product without having a negative impact as little as they can on the environment and the area that they're in, don't lose out because they're spending the extra money to do it the right way. One of the things that Colonel Wilson brought up is trying to have where only companies that have PBMs will be eligible for state contracts. That's a doable thing, because who would be against being on the side of good, safe APOs. So I think that's something that TRAM can get behind, that all of us listening and participating today can get behind. But again, it goes back to get on the phone, call your legislatures, find out where they're at, and then encourage them to take a better look at it. Get on TRAM, TRAM, Texas.org, find out more, get involved. It's not too late, but if we wait around too much longer, the train's going to leave and we'll be in trouble. Who are members? We have a very diverse group. I myself out here, because of our ranch and we have Sandy Creek running through it, water is a big deal for us. We have a group, Dr. Nelson and such, in Houston, where a lot of the concrete plants are taking and putting a lot of silica into the air right by a school. So it's very diverse. Please read up on it. I'm sure my time is getting tight, so appreciate the opportunity. Check out tramtexas.org. Get involved now. Thank you.
Thank you, Fermin. Appreciate it. Okay, we're going to go to you next, Jill. As you know, grassroots organizations can join TRAM, nonprofits can join TRAM, and there are also ways for HOAs to get involved. They can also join, or for groundwater districts or school districts, there are ways for them to express their support through resolutions. Jill, your organization, the BioLand Conservancy, is a member of TRAM, but is not in the Hill Country. So I guess I actually have two questions for you. One is, tell us why BioLand Conservancy is finding common cause on this issue with groups across the state. What is the commonality there? And then the second question is a little bit of a sidestep too. I know that the BioLand Conservancy has been working collaboratively with landowners in your region on TCEQ rules change for gravel and sand mines in the San Jacinto Basin. And so I'm curious about that process and what it says about the need for legislative action. So two questions there. Go ahead, Jill.
Okay, thanks, Cliff. Glad to be here today. Just a little bit of background. BioLand Conservancy is a land conservation organization, and we've been around since the mid-1990s. Our area of conservation focus is the Lake Houston watershed, which is the upper San Jacinto River watershed. And that's an area about the size of Connecticut that provides about 85% of the drinking water for millions of people in the Houston region every day. So we focus on preserving land along streams, so floodways and floodplains. So what we started researching as an organization is the floodplain impact of sand and gravel mining, particularly on the West Fork of the San Jacinto River. And what we found is back in the 1990s, active mining was utilizing about 9% of that floodway or floodplain area, and now it's over 35%. So it's grown exponentially as the years and decades have gone by, and it's having a serious impact on the water quality of the region. So this has been probably our top statewide advocacy issue for some time. And to be really frank, the 2019 legislative session was disheartening for us. It was an uphill slog all the way. We've worked really closely with our local state rep, Dan Huberty, on this issue going back probably 5-6 sessions now. And we got one very minor tweak to the law passed last time, but then had another bill that would allow mining in the river, which really, upends every good thing that has been accomplished. So I came out of the session really disheartened and found out earlier this year, end of last year, about this coalition forming, and realized that this, for us, was the missing piece. We felt like a voice in the wilderness at the last session, and we really feel like there's strength in numbers here, and that together and looking at this as a statewide issue, which it most certainly is, that we can accomplish a whole lot more. Speaking about the TCEQ rulemaking process, so we regularly interact with the industry association. We also have a grassroots group in our watershed that's been very active with that interaction as well. And about 6 months ago or so, we decided that we would try to work together to mandate best management practices in the watershed, thinking that it would be simpler to scale it down rather than trying to do it statewide. So knowing that we needed to be at the table for this, even though we would prefer to have statewide legislation, we don't think this is an issue that's confined to one watershed. We agreed to be a stakeholder. It's still a tough road for us. We don't have the experts on our side. The industry association has deep pockets. They can hire people who are much more knowledgeable about this than us. But we know we need to be at the table and be involved. So we're very much happy to have TRAM and the technical experts like Mark who can kind of help balance the scales out for us as stakeholders.
Thanks, Jill. That's helpful insight. Bob, the next question's coming for you. As the director of a groundwater conservation district and the president of a land trust, what are your biggest concerns with the current state of aggregate operations in our region and in your home county of Kendall County? And do you think that there are any tools available to local communities through their local governments, for instance, that are currently that aren't currently being used or that could be used more? And you're on mute, Bob.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
All right, very good. Two excellent questions, and I really have to wear two different hats as president of the Conservancy and as director of the Groundwater District. And speaking with my Conservancy hat, our concerns, of course, are aesthetic. The Guadalupe River in our area is a very special place. Hard to quantify exactly, how we can use that to protect it. We, of course, are also very concerned with riparian destruction, which is what APOs do, is pretty much tear up the area anywhere close to a river or anywhere nearby. When I switch to my groundwater district hat, my concerns are equally serious, but a little different from that. APOs work generally in areas with a lot of alluvial water. I mean, that's how these aggregate deposits formed. And alluvial water is not real widely studied, but it's a very important source of water for a number of people. And, there is very definitely a concern about the impact on both quantity and quality of water in alluvial wells up and down the river. In our area, I know the Guadalupe River State Parks makes great use of alluvial water there. Probably our biggest concern of all, and perhaps the Guadalupe River is a little bit unique in this, but the Guadalupe River is actually the prime source of recharge for the Middle Trinity Aquifer, which involves several different subsections. We could spend several hours talking just about that. But a large percentage of the residents in Kendall County and in the near part of the Hill Country rely on one or another section of the Trinity Aquifer for their water supply. For many of us, it is our only water supply other than rainwater, which we could also spend a lot of time talking about. But just in a nutshell, the Guadalupe River is a little unique in that as you go up and down the river, it becomes what we call either a gaining stream or a losing stream. In a gaining stream area, the aquifers are actually putting water into the river, which is important for downstream flow, which is important for recreational activities, just all the things that we all kind of take for granted at the Guadalupe River. When the Guadalupe River becomes a losing stream, it is pouring water back into the aquifers. And as I say, it's probably, everybody thinks rainfall is what recharges the aquifer. Well, ultimately, I guess it does, but the way it happens is not nearly as much through sinkholes and just ground penetration as it is through water that goes into the river and then from the river into the aquifers. So we are very concerned in this case on both quantity and quality of the water in the river, and aggregate operations are not real good stewards of the water, both in quantity and in quality. And as the other speakers have noted, you know, this industry is largely unregulated in the state of Texas, and we have some legislators that are very interested in protecting these resources, and others that are, you know, I hate to be too prejudiced, but who are much more on the side of industry and really don't pay as much concern or much attention to the environment. TRAM is a great step forward. I would tell you about one other group, which is called the Coalition for the Preservation of the Guadalupe River and Watersheds. Anybody interested in this can go to our Cibolo Conservancy website. But this is an organization really formed by a coalition of landowners up and down the Guadalupe. Unfortunately, many of whom are absentee owners, and it's a little bit harder for them, you know, to participate directly in the process. But these folks are working alongside TRAM. They've actually they have access to some fairly high-powered attorneys to figure out how we best get the attention of the Texas legislature and move effectively to get some regulations in place. So that's another organization that I think is very, very much worth supporting as you're able to. I think the one thing that no one has mentioned to this point is, though, if you know individuals who own sensitive land or who own any land up and down the river, put that land under conservation easement. Then you've got the power of the federal government behind you, protecting you. One of the mandates, as anyone who's familiar with land trust, with conservation easements, is one thing that is not allowed is strip mining or surface mining of any sort. And again, I could spend a day telling all of our participants the value of conservation easements. But if you're looking for a simple way to be certain that your land never becomes an APO, now in the future, your heirs, your assigns, whoever owns the land ultimately will never be allowed to turn it into an aggregate producing operation when it is under conservation easement. So I think that's one tool that is being underused. And I have to say that we personally were involved with quite a number of landowners who were very interested in pursuing this process. COVID came along, and all of a sudden, a lot of things kind of went to the back burner. So I'm hoping that, number one, that we move beyond the current state of affairs with COVID, and I'm hoping that the interest will reemerge as far as putting more and more of this land under conservation easement. And I think that process, working alongside the Coalition for the Preservation and alongside TRAM, is our best hope. But I would certainly underscore what the other panel participants have said is we can't put this off. Burying our heads in the sand would be a horrible pun, you know, to apply to this. But if we do that, we're all going to really regret it somewhere down the road when we can't reverse course.
Thanks, Bob. We're just at 11 o'clock now. I want to get time just for one audience question, and we'll make it real quick. I just want to say, you know, that this is a huge subject, and there's a lot of really exciting work going on through TRAM and starting to engage groundwater conservation districts and land trusts and other kinds of organizations that can lend their voices of support to the issue. And that feeds well into this one audience question that we'll have time for. And I'm going to ask the panelists to make your response brief if you can, which will allow another panelist to respond as well if they choose to. So the question is, exactly how does the APO industry exercise influence on the Texas legislature, and what is this coalition doing to counteract that kind of influence? And, you know, how does the coalition exert its own influence on what happens at the legislature? Who would like to take that?
Well, I have a quick answer.
Go ahead. For me, you beat me. Go ahead.
Sorry. I have a quick answer. Money. Donations to legislators somehow has a tendency to affect their thought process. And how do we counter that is by having people, their voters, influence them more. There's one of two things almost every politician wants to do, and that's get reelected. And the good ones want to be reelected so they can do the good things. The bad ones want to be reelected because they want the power. So we have to threaten the fact that they may not be reelected, because we can't counter the money side. It's a $2.5 billion industry, and believe me, they're generous in their donations.
Thanks, Fermin. Does anybody else want to give a final word on that question, or in general, a parting word?
If I would love to.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
I would love to jump in just to say that not just your legislators and their direct impact on this, but get after your legislatures about TCEQ. TCEQ, as they will admit, is they see their mission as promoting development or facilitating development. And I wish we could get their attention back to focusing on environmental quality, which is something they've done very little of in recent years. So TCEQ is pretty much controlled by the legislature, or at least its appointments are. So not only approach your legislator, representative or senator, but tell them we need to change the focus of TCEQ.
Thanks, Bob. And Mark, did you want to get one more word in?
Yeah, I'll second both Bob's and Fermin's comments. The industry's large. They have a lot of money. We need to work this as a long-range marathon. We need to take our discouragements from the last session, sift through the successes, which was we got on the radar screen. We were identified. We need to take our discouragement and rehire ourselves the next morning and continue this marathon. TCEQ needs to be focused back on their mission. With their mission statement has nothing what Bob just said. What they're doing, what Bob said, but their mission is protecting the health of the citizens. We need to focus on that, and we need to focus on the legislature. I think we've gotten their attention. We need to take a deep breath and continue the marathon here, which is going to be a pretty steep uphill battle, but we're gaining.
In fairness to the TCEQ staff, speaking to them individually, all of them would like to have more authority. There's just no teeth in the legislation that they can do what they would like to do. They're pretty boxed in. So going back to the legislators, giving them some teeth, let TCEQ do the job that they were trained to do. Most of these guys come from college wanting to protect the environment, and then they're asked not to.
Yeah.
Thank you
No,
so much.
no question for me, and the people themselves are good people. That includes the APO operations personnel. Individually, they get up with goals just like we do. It's the culture of the industry and the practices of the industry and the culture and the limitation of resources within TCEQ, no question.
Thanks, Mark. Jill, final word from you, if you care to.
Just thanks to HCA for bringing this issue to the forefront.
Well,
Amen.
thank you all very much. It's been a great panel. I'm sorry that we don't have more time for discussion. I love talking with each of you when we have the opportunity. And I just want to encourage our audience to reach out to the Hill Country Alliance if you want to get plugged into this, and we'll plug you right in. And I also want to remind folks to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you want to enter a question for our next panel. And I'm going to hand it over. Oh, and one other thing. I did, since we're talking about the legislature, I also do want to plug our first panel tomorrow at 10 a.m. The panelists will be State Rep Andy Murr, State Rep Aaron Zwiener, Commissioner Dennis Neffendorf from Gillespie County, and Commissioner Lon